Good morning, everyone. Much has transpired since three of us here today, Cindy Weatherly from Georgia, who we thank for her hospitality, and her husband Neil, Kelly Nelson from Tennessee, and myself, I'm from Maine, participated in a larger two-day conference in Maine last August. There were 12 long-time, some dating back to the late 60s, education researchers, activists who made presentations at that conference. Rosa Corey from California, expert on UN Agenda 21, also made an excellent presentation at last year's conference. The presentations covered at last year's conference and this shorter conference of longtime researchers and activists covering restructuring over the past year will be included in the 4-disc set entitled Global Road to Ruin Through Education, which will be available at Amazon.com shortly. We have with us today Jeannie Georges from Indiana, certainly one of the nation's leading researchers on performance-based Skinnerian, Pavlovian, outcomes-based education, and Marxist critical thinking. Jeannie was unable to attend our conference last August. We also have with us the following leading activist researchers from Florida and Tennessee who have more recently joined in the battle to preserve America's capitalist economic system and its formerly pre-1965 superb academic education system. Karen Bracken from Tennessee, Kelly Nelson, one of the leading researchers who attended our conference last August, Karen Schoen from Florida, Diane Kippas from Florida, and Debbie Guneau. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Those gals have been the first two, the Tennessee gals and the Florida gals. We very much appreciate their activism on the ground. They're going up against very, very important people in the corporations, leading governors, ex-governors like former Jeb Bush in Florida, who has come into my state of Maine with a Heritage Foundation and completely turned education on its head and wants to privatize all forms of education with tax money. I want to thank the above activists and researchers for not only attending this conference, but for giving our longtime education political researchers who were with us last year a tremendous, much-needed shot in the arm. These gals are not only doing fantastic research on the present transformation of our educational system from traditional academics to the Soviet Polytech system, workforce training to the exclusion of academics, except dumbed-down science and math. They are courageously going up against the international corporate fascist cartel led by the late Governor Jeb Bush of Florida, Chiefs for Change, tax-exempt for foundations, corporations, and the Obama administration and the Council on Foreign Relations. This cartel's goal is to utterly destroy what is left of the deliberately dumbed-down education system and to rid itself forever of messy elected school boards. I'm a former school board member, so I know how angry they can become when a school board member represents the people instead of the hierarchy, which in this case is business and government in bed together, corporate fascism. The pilots for this are tax-funded charter schools, for this bringing down the whole system. The pilots for this unelected new system are tax-funded charter schools with no elected boards. Since the limited learning for lifelong labor, and I attribute that fantastic title to Cynthia Weatherly, it's 4 words. You really don't have to listen to any of us because she's got it all in those 4 words. Limited learning for lifelong labor. Get that in your head. When you go and testify, if you think you can't say anything else, just go up and say, this is limited learning for lifelong labor. Since the limited learning for lifelong labor system requires that every heartbeat, every single one on this planet, be included in the globalized computer system, all children must be included in the system. which states that all education, which that means that all education must be transformed to the Soviet Polytech global workforce training system, using our children to spin off profits for the global elite. How can that seemingly impossible crashing of public and private education take place? And they set up the 135th floor of the Rockefeller Center on a monthly basis, and they discuss how important it is to keep the truth from the American people that the left and the right at the top are the same. And they sit there and they say, how are we going to do it? How are we going to control every single human being on this planet for school to work, for workforce training? And the only way is through tax-supported school choice. Those desperate parents seeking a way out of the deliberately dumbed-down education system should be careful what they wish for. Federal law requires that any tax-supported entity that provides education for children from 8 until 4 in the afternoon or whatever, homeschool, private, religious, or virtual schools, must conform all activities, hiring, curriculum, assessment, after-school activities, sports, teacher training, health services, etc., to federal regulations and guidelines. So that means the Catholic schools went for this a long time ago, and now I would say they are almost the leaders in their Catholic initiative, Identity Initiative, Common Core. They are really in trouble. I mean, they're not even, they've been had. And that's what's going to happen to any other entity in education other than the public schools, which Gerstner's going to bring down anyway. He's called for getting rid of all 16,000 IBM. So that's what's going to happen with school choice. The Catholic schools did it. They did it in France too, the same history. And that's what's going to happen in homeschooling, private education, religious education, virtual, computer education, any education funded with 1 penny of tax money. These, if we do not stop the, regardless of victories with what I refer to as the communist core, I know I'm called a radical, but I can afford to do that at my age. What I refer to as the communist core, and that's what it is, and you'll understand later, I'm going to explain that. If we do not stop the tax-funded school choice agenda, we will have accomplished nothing, even if we have victories with Common Core. These very parents who rightfully are seeking an escape from the deliberately dumbed-down education system will, once they place their children in these tax-funded private schools of all stripes, find their children required to take the very communist core assessment they thought they had killed, and which is receiving so much publicity all over the country, as if it's the only thing that matters, and be trained with that communist core assessment, etc., to the deliberately dumbed-down, Marxist-oriented, lifelong Soviet workforce training agenda. The internationalists and at the UN, in education, in the corporations, tax-exempt foundations, have successfully accomplished their plans, which were laid in the early 1900s, to use the schools to change America's highly successful capitalistic economic system, which brought hundreds of millions of people to this country to enjoy upward mobility, to a planned economy in the New World Order. That is a direct quote from the Carnegie Corporation's little blue book, which is at americandeception.com. You can go download it. You would never find it in its original form. This little book, 1934, entitled Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies, is available at americandeception.com. Carnegie, between 1933 and 1941, implemented its 8-year study, which, interestingly enough, was the forerunner pilot for the detested Skinnerian performance-based, outcomes-based education, introduced as early as 1965 in the form of mastery learning, Skinner. The first disaster was in Chicago. This was referred to by Education Week as a human tragedy. They did this in the inner cities all across the country. This dumbing down form of education was piloted in all inner city schools across the country through today. The system which dumbs down which does away with K through 12, A, B, C, D, E, F, has no competition, uses Pavlov, Skinner, focuses on dumbed-down math and science, is in fact the Soviet Polytech system of workforce training. It's been piloted across the country in inner-city schools, and that's why the schools have all failed. And now they had to change the system, say, from our traditional academic competitive system, because they can't put the Polytech in, which relates to each child being trained, not educated individually. They can't put that in with the old academic system that's competitive, where kids compete against each other with A, B, C, D, and K through 12. So they had to change it, and they did it. They did the piloting through the inner city schools. And it's a tragedy, which that's another story, a tremendous tragedy. So anyway, then in 1953, after they'd piloted this, shortly after, UN we had in 1945, then in 1953, hearings were held by Congress. They were the Congressional Reese Committee hearings, and Norman Dodd was the principal investigator. And I knew him personally, and he's a wonderful man. And he was called up to New York as part of the investigation by the Ford Foundation. And this is for people who can't understand how we ended up with a Soviet Polytech system. It was planned all the way back in the 30s, right after the Bolshevik Revolution. These are American educators going back and forth to Russia, and they thought this was a great experiment. And they were going to put it in here. It took a while, and then in 1953, the committee was so upset about what was going on in the United States and in school, really very, very concerned, that they investigated the foundations. And Dodd was told by Rao and Gaither of the Ford Foundation that the foundations got their instructions from the White House, and those instructions were to use their money to change America so that it could be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union people think is dead. Well, it is, but the system, which Lenin always wanted, was international socialism, is alive and well. So that is where so much of the system came from. Now, those in charge of this destruction of our political and economic freedom, and just a few are named here: Gates, Walmart, Pearson, Broad Foundation, Arne Duncan, the Council on Foreign Relations, David Rockefeller, the Heritage Foundation, and all other neoconservative Trotskyite groups that are pushing school choice all over the place, including many religious organizations posing as conservative, and the educational leadership, unions at the top, not teachers, are now very blatant regarding their plans. Chester Finn, a longtime change agent, goes back to the 60s working for Senator Patrick Moynihan, Democrat, and later on assistant secretary in the office I worked in after I left the Office of Educational Research and Improvement in the Department of Ed. He's now the head of the Fordham Institute. He has called for, believe it or not, getting rid of private education. Here we are, the Atlantic Monthly, why private schools are dying out. This is recent, July 14th. And it says, private education, as we have known it, is on its way out at both the K-12 and post-secondary levels. At the very least, it's headed for dramatic shrinkage, save for a handful of places and circumstances, to be replaced by a very different set of institutional, governance, financing, and education delivery mechanisms. All right, now this is our friend. He is in charge of bringing the whole system down. Now, Louis Gerstner, former chief executive officer of IBM, calls for dismantling. This is in the Wall Street Journal. He did it 6 years ago and July 14th, or where, well, that one's back March, the Chester Finn one. This is July 14th. Gerstner again in the Wall Street Journal calling on Obama to pull down the 16,000 public school districts. And the only real reason for that is they've got to get rid of the elected school boards. Now, why must public schools be abolished across the board? Because they have elected school boards. And why? And they're using the private schools if they can put, if they can fund them with tax money, then you don't have to worry about the elected boards or anything, because if they fund them with tax money, they're going to have to conform just like the public schools have to, because they've been funded with tax money. We have to conform to the federal guidelines, and all public education will have to do that, including homeschoolers. So here we are today, pleading with the American people to wake up and recognize how their and their children's futures are being impacted by some very greedy individuals who want to use our children as human capital to spin off profits for the global elite. We are between a very hard rock and a very hard place, to put it mildly. The options being offered us are truly lethal. The options to the deliberately dumbed down public education system are truly lethal, since they all relate to putting every human being on this planet into, as Cynthia Weatherly has so succinctly put it on the computer, limited learning for lifelong labor. Let me repeat that. Think it through for your children. Is that what you want for your grandchildren, great-grandchildren? No. C.S. Lewis said it well. When training beats education, civilization dies. The only option we have, and I of all people who wrote this huge book, this is the abridged version, this is the abridged, this only weighs 1 pound, the big one weighs 4. It's a free download at deliberatedumbingdown.com, which is good. It's also, this good one is an updated version at Amazon. But the only option we have, and I of all people never dreamed I would have to offer such an option. I really can't even believe I'm telling you this. Maybe I shouldn't be telling you this, but restore the public education system to its pre-1965 academic excellence. We had the finest education system in the world prior to 1965. We have many public school teachers and school board members who will join with us in such a venture. Legislation is required at the federal and state levels to remove all tax funding of public education. We may have some problems with, handicap stuff like that. We'll have to work that out, but it can be done, I think. Education must be restored to the local level with locally elected boards and academics. Before we even can attempt such a venture, we must educate Americans to the dangers of all the tax-funded school choice options being presented to us today. Now, how it happened, I'll do this quickly, and you can go on the internet and you can read this, but this is how it happened. We were all taken to the cleaners, including myself in many cases. I call it the devil's 7-pronged fork, and you can go and look that up on the internet and read it. It's the dialectic, create the problem, people scream, impose the solution. That's what they did. Semantic deception, words that sound good to us have a totally different meaning to them, like critical thinking, which Jeannie Georges is going to really thoroughly discuss with you today. Gradualism, frog in the cold water, heated up gradually over 100 years, you don't even know, you're dying. Big bucks, Federal Reserve, both parties the same. Tragedy and hope, Quigley, Clinton's mentor at Georgetown. Carol Quigley explained that in the back of the book. Both parties are the same at the top, have the same agenda. Then public education dumbing down, deliberate, which we've all discussed, it's all in my big book, for globalism. And media control, total media shutdown of anything any of us have to say or do. We know that. So I want to thank all of you very much for being here today. These gals are going to show us the activists marvelous researcher activists we got on board with us are going to explain to us what they've been doing and the dangers of, certainly in Tennessee and Florida, key states, certainly Jeb Bush's Florida, which has impacted Maine enormously. They will be speaking with us today, and I want to thank all of you for being here. Again, thanks Cindy and Neil, and let's say lots of prayers that this will be a very successful conference of a few Americans who stood up and realized what was right. It's really a matter of what's right and wrong, not what is right and left. What is right and wrong? In regard to my optimism related to how long we have before the system goes down, before they, put us into this international totalitarian system, I'd like to point out that in my travels recently, I've been thinking back towards Rosa Corey's Behind the Green Mask, which is a wonderful book that you can get at Amazon or anywhere. She's done great research on the global plan, Sustainable Development, UN Agenda 21, and she speaks all over the country, all over the world in regard to this regional government, which is a communist form of government. And it's depressing when you read what they're planning on doing. I mean, like stack and pack. That means that if you have a lowly house or even a little pretty cottage out in the countryside, you have a few ducks and chickens and all, but they don't want you there. You're not going to be allowed to live there. They've got to get all those areas, put them all off limits. They want to put, this is according to their plans. You can read them, and they're all, Rose has done a good job in spelling it out with documents, to put all of us into the cities in what is known as stack and pack apartment buildings, one above the other, and they're going to have it looking very nice. They'll have a two-way road, and you can have a bicycle path, and they'll have a nice little bistro where you can have your coffee, and you can talk to all your friends. Like, check the community education project that we have included, Ruth Feld's community education project. That's in our project, which is very, very interesting. I found a little diagram that is included. It's an image in Ruth Feld's paper that relates exactly to what Rose is talking about. And I believe it's dated back in the 40s or 50s. It has the plan there with the, the town in the center, and then all the little, you're all inside, you're all here, you're all there for your services, etc., and it's all green around you. So that's interesting in itself, in that they've been trying to get this. The American Planning Association, the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, ALEC, whoever, Chamber of Commerce, these are the same people that I'm talking about in this presentation today. They have really been working at getting Americans to go along with this plan. And a lot of Americans have fallen for this plan. I recommend that they better darn well read Rosa Koire's book and get it, because, and fight hard for their children's futures, because this is not America that they have planned for us. But we still, going back to the time we have, I don't see them getting that within even, maybe not even within 20 years. But they may have in the back of their mind, if we can get a constitutional convention within the next few years, we can run with that and get rid of the Constitution, which guarantees our right to private property, in which case they will be comfortable in moving more slowly towards putting us into that type of habitat. We've got it. We're going to have our own habitat. We're not the animals have theirs. We'll have our own habitat, stack and pack like they have in communist China. I saw it a couple of years ago in communist China. I was there. So anyway, I did want to point that out, that we have time, unless you good people fall for any form of constitutional convention that could take our property rights away from us, because they would change the Constitution. See, and that may be well what they're planning for. So they say, oh, well, we don't need 20 years out there, because we'll be able to do whatever we want, because we will have destroyed property rights through the Constitutional Convention. So I just did want to mention that. Good luck, everybody, and be sure to become informed on not just education, but on education is the key, because the children have to be indoctrinated into what they want to do to us in the future. So that's why education is so important. Without it, they never could have done it. Thank you.